Tonight, I want to respond to all of those concerns that you've brought to me about the issue of Nigel Farage versus Rupert Lowe. I know that some people believe in unity and other people believe that Nigel Farage is a sellout. And so, what I wanted to do was bring you today a specially extended show. This is the first time that I've brought a guest onto a show, and it's the first time that I've extended anything at all. Rupert Lowe has been treated badly. Nigel Farage perhaps has been treated badly. But the man who knows more about this than anybody else is Ben Habib. Ben is on holiday at the moment, but he's taken time off to speak to us. Ben, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Andre. Good to see you.
Okay, Ben, look, this isn't a genuine political debate in the normal sense. I want to ask you about tactics. I genuinely believe that we should be united together. Why am I wrong?
So just explain to me what you mean by united, Andre. I think the question here is, what is it that we wish to unify? Can I turn the question back onto you?
Yes,
do you mind if I do that? Yeah.
Yes, you can. I think it's important to do that. So my view is this. We need to protect and defend this country. We need to, galvanize people into taking back control of the country. I see Reform and others as a real opportunity to do this. I know that Nigel Farage is an egotist. I know he's a bit of a nightmare, but I just feel like, if we don't unify behind him, then potentially we're going to lose this opportunity. So that's what I mean by unity.
So the question I would ask you then, if I may ask you another question, is to shut your eyes, pretend you've never heard of Nigel Farage or Reform UK before, and someone says to you, would you vote, Andre, knowing as you do the plight of the country and the really substantial dangers we find ourselves in, would you vote for a party which was not concerned about the rapid rate of demographic change in the country, that was not in favor of deporting all illegal migrants who've come to this country, that advocated for some kind of political arrangement with Islam, that was putting forward candidates that were pro Tony Blair, pro Peter Mandelson, Remainers, candidates who believe in transgender ideology, who have been partly responsible for the settling of refugees across the country and endorsing the approach of the settlement of these so-called refugees, illegal migrants, I should say, across the country. Would you vote for a party like that?
Well, so fairly obviously no, but let me just throw something back at you. Is there not an argument for political expediency?
So that's the question, and the question then, the question you're asking, I think, is Nigel may be saying all of the things that I've just described and putting forward these candidates for political expediency in the hope that by going to the centre ground, he can gain government. And then once he's in government, he will then deliver everything that we hope and expect of him, which is to deport illegal migrants, to leave the EU properly, to make policies for the betterment of the country and its people. And we just have to believe that he's going to do that. And my argument there is that we can't believe it. When you have someone who is saying quite the opposite of what needs to be done, he is duping the British public. He is guilty of subterfuge. He is banging a drum in which he doesn't believe. And at that point, you can't either you have to believe what he's saying, in which case we don't want him in office, or you believe that he's a liar and the lying is acceptable. And we've had far too much political expediency. It's political expediency that has got the country in many respects to the precipice in the first place. It's Cameron promising us that he would get immigration down to tens of thousands and not doing it. Boris Johnson promising us that we leave the EU and then not doing it. It's that political expediency, the preparedness to compromise yourself in order to gain office, that has brought us to this point. And what we must do is take a leaf out of what's gone on across the Atlantic and actually say what we're going to do, believe in it, and carry the British people with that agenda. And I would just say this as well, just on the political front, if Nigel thinks by tacking to the centre ground and trashing the agenda, the agenda that the British people want, that he's somehow going to get elected. He's wrong, because the British people, the majority of the British people, want what I've just described. They want a proud, prosperous, independent United Kingdom, a sovereign United Kingdom with borders, with our culture being put forward, first, etc., etc. That's what the British people want. By getting to the centre ground, actually, Nigel is damaging his chances of getting elected.
Okay, so look, everybody knows that you and I politically agree, but let me ask you this question. You are without question the most popular political figure on my show on Talk, and probably the most popular political figure amongst Reform voters after Nigel Farage. What stops you just sitting in Reform and saying, do you know what? You can't budge me. I'm going to force you to do the right thing. And the argument in favour of that, Ben, would be this, that we have this vehicle now with 5 MPs, and actually, rather than reinventing the wheel, don't you just sit there and force them to do the right thing?
So you might recall I've been banging the drum for democratization of the party.
You have.
And the reason I was banging that drum was because there is no mechanism within Reform to be heard. I tried to be heard and I got basically sidelined. Rupert tried to be heard and he was more than sidelined. They tried to destroy him. And I think it is important, coming back to what they did to Rupert. But the reason I was banging the drum for democratization is because I'd already suffered at the hands of Nigel Farage back in 2020, 2021. And I knew that Nigel needed, if he was to be the leader of a political party, that political party had to have the apparatus in place to be able to hold him to account, to have checks and balances in place so that the ideology, if you like, of the party couldn't be undermined by an individual who I know to be a political expedient. Nigel Farage is a political expedient. Let me just be clear about that. People may not like to hear it, but he's not an ideologue. He doesn't actually have a political philosophical framework on which he hangs his policies that he brings forward. He tacks and he moves depending on where he thinks he needs to go in order to gain popularity, though I think he's making a mistake by going to the centre ground. But if he had democratized the party, Andre, if he had really given members a proper voice, or had some mechanism put in place by which senior members in particular obviously could be heard and legitimately heard, not just, given the opportunity to mouth off and then ignored, but have their comments, properly considered by the leadership, then I would have stayed in the party. Absolutely. If the party had been democratized, I would have stayed in the party. But again, Nigel and Zia Yusuf lied. They said they'd democratize the party and they hadn't. They control it. They've shifted ownership from Nigel's left hand into his right hand in a new company that they've set up, where actually Zia Yusuf now has 50% of the control. And I see him as a really particularly bad individual. So the party is incapable, as it's structured at the moment, of being reformed from within. And so you have to step out of the party at that point. If you have a leader that isn't saying the right things and is unlikely to do the right things, and you can't influence the party from within, then there's no mechanism by which the agenda can be delivered.
Can I offer a defense to this? So I look around, my community, my friends, my family. We are being, kicked out of politics. At the end of the day, the selection for the Labour candidate, Conservative candidate, Liberal Democrat candidate in your community will be controlled centrally. So there's no real democracy in this country. And I just sit there and I think to myself, none of us have the answer to this. Why is it wrong?
Yeah, but Andre, so it's not one or the other. It's that Nigel is ideologically not sound and there's no democracy. You've got the worst of all worlds. It is literally Nigel Farage. People say to me, come on, Ben, stop trying to set hurdles in the way of Nigel. Nigel is Reform UK. Reform UK is Nigel. And that's the point. Yes, that is absolutely right. And that's the problem. Rupert is a sane individual. He was banging the drum for exactly what we need. You said I was the most popular member of Reform. I think probably I'm not in Reform anymore, but I think Rupert actually is more popular than I am. He's more widely known now. And Rupert was set aside. And this is the third thing. and it has to be discussed. And it's that Nigel Farage cannot tolerate anyone gaining the limelight alongside him. And the other crucial thing that we need in this country, if we're to save it, is when a colloquially right wing, by right wing I mean pro-British, pro-borders, pro-sovereignty, when that kind of party gets into office, it needs a team of proverbial Samsons in the cabinet. It cannot be Nigel Farage plus a whole load of dross. It has to be guys. The Home Secretary has to be a powerful individual. The Chancellor of the Exchequer has to be a powerful individual. They all have to be equally big people. And Nigel won't create a team like that. Anyone who gets popular, anyone who can show that they can do the job, he gets jealous and he moves them aside.
So I'm gonna be completely open and honest. When I had a private meeting with Nigel Farage, I said, you need to create a transition team. You need to announce it right now. You need to pick the senior advisors for every single department. And I said, you need to bring Ben Habib in to lead that. And what I also said was, I don't care whether you like each other. I don't care whether,
Absolutely.
Ironically, I think you personally do like each other, but I don't care whether there's any personal disagreements. Look, so my next comment is this. If I was to ban egotists and narcissists from politics, there'd be no one left. I mean, at the end of the day, how is it sensible to believe that Nigel Farage is going to do this voluntarily? Why not force him through the part? I mean, 400.
But you can't. But there's no mechanism. That's the point, Andre. If it was, so there are three issues here. There's a narcissist who controls a party, and he doesn't have the correct ideology. He doesn't say what's required to be said in order to save the country. So everything is wrong. If you had democracy, you could force the narcissist to change his agenda.
Yeah, I agree
if you had the right agenda, but you didn't have democracy, you might back him anyway and say, well, what the hell? We need someone who's going to save the country. I'll suspend my right to free speech for a moment while the country is saved. I think that's a very dangerous line to go down. But what you've got here is a narcissist without any mechanism by which to bring influence to bear on him, and a set of beliefs that he has which will not save this country. He's a problem. The path of reform in the UK is now a problem.
I'll be honest with you, Ben. When I was in the Conservative Party, I was involved in Conservative Way Forward. They were the Thatcherite pressure group, and there was the TRG. So I'll tell you the thing that I genuinely agree with, what you've just said. That internal pressure from various factions is incredibly helpful in terms of holding the leadership to account. There's one thing I want to pick you up on, though. I've known Nigel Farage for a while. Look, at the end of the day, he's a big ego. He was always going to be a big ego. I don't think that's a big surprise. But I'm not sure I agree with you on this whole he doesn't believe in it. I think we're all instinctively conservative, and what he wants to do is just get in there and do it. So
no, he doesn't believe in it. He doesn't. I'm afraid I have to report he doesn't believe in it. And
well, what makes you say that?
There are a few things that make me say it. First of all, and you have to bear with me, please, because it's a bit of personal history that I had with him. He stood down unilaterally without discussion with any of us, the 317 candidates against the Conservative Party in 2019. And the argument he made, which I bought and I accept as a matter of principle, was that if he hadn't done that, there was a risk of a Corbyn government second referendum and Brexit would have been lost. I get that argument. But he also knows, and he knew then and he still knows, that the two treaties that Boris Johnson then subsequently signed, and one of which was already in draft form, the withdrawal agreement, was not Brexit. It left Northern Ireland behind in the European Union, and it gave a whole load of powers over to the EU, including a commitment for the trade agreement when it came down the track to align on fundamental areas of law, including net zero, handing over control of our military to the European Union, etc., etc., etc. So we knew the treaties that Boris Johnson was banging the drum about back in 2019, saying he was going to get Brexit done. We knew they were fundamentally flawed. And Nigel got us, the MEPs, to toe his line, which was that we must stand down against the Conservative Party to give Boris Johnson the opportunity to deliver Brexit. And he said, notwithstanding the fact that the withdrawal agreement is bad, what he told us in private was, we're going to bring pressure to bear on Boris Johnson, who accepts that he's going to unpick all of this in the trade agreement that was going to then come in 2020. When we left the European Parliament on 31st of January 2020, I wanted Nigel to stay on the battlefield. Instead, Nigel vacated the political battlefield, and he said Brexit is done. Rupert Lowe and a chap now called, now he's died sadly, Robert Rowland, and I took Nigel out for supper in August 2020, when the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, which was to come into being, was being negotiated. And there was an opportunity then for Nigel to bring real pressure to bear on Boris Johnson. And Rupert and I and Robert appealed to Nigel to please come back to the political battlefield for a few months while that Trade and Cooperation Agreement was negotiated. Nigel Farage turned round to me at supper, a supper that I had hosted at vast expense to appeal to him. And he turned around and he said, well, it's all right for you, Ben. You were born with a silver spoon rammed up your backside. And I've given up 20 years of my life to politics, and I must now go and look after my own interests. And that, too, is a legitimate need. Every individual needs to go on and make their money. But the thing that really got me down was that Nigel Farage continued to say that Brexit's done, so that lesser voices like me couldn't make the arguments. People would say, Mr. Brexit says it's done. Why are you still bleating on about it? And can I just also say, Andre, if we genuinely left the EU, if we left the liberal global order in 2020, the country would not be in the shape it's in now. We would have been forced to deregulate. We would have been forced to cut taxes, because we would have had to make the United Kingdom fighting fit. We would have had to put up our borders. The whole notion of this liberal global order, mass immigration being the solution to countries' economic woes, all of that would have been set aside. We would have got a proper pro-British government.
Okay.
And
Okay.
it was because, and so just one more thing. And before I joined Reform UK, I went to see Nigel. I spoke to Nigel on the phone. Sorry, I didn't want to go to see him. I spoke to him on the phone, and I asked him about Brexit and said, look, Richard Tice has invited me to join the party. You're the major shareholder. I need to know that we can continue the fight for Brexit, continue the fight for Northern Ireland, that there won't be any shoddy deals done with the Tories, that you will call out the DUP if they do the dirty on Northern Ireland. And also that I had some qualms about the money about the Brexit Party, which I can go into if you want to. But anyway, on every point, Nigel refuted me. He would not agree that Brexit still required to be fought. He would not agree that he would stand against the DUP if they did the dirty. And he would not agree to even sign a letter, which I wanted Richard to sign, saying that he would run the party consensually himself.
But hang on a second. So let me tell you about an incident I had with Nigel Farage. I don't think I've ever spoken publicly about this. So I was walking down St. James's, and he happened to walk out of one of the private members' clubs. There's a number of them on that street, as you know. For people who don't know, it's a bit of a posh bit of London next to Pall Mall. And I bumped into Farage, and I said to him, listen, Nigel, I've got a Conservative member of Parliament that I work for who's got a majority of 866. You've not only challenged him, but you've moved your regional headquarters into our building in our constituency. I said, it doesn't make any sense to destroy this guy because a Liberal Democrat or Labour pro-European will win. And he said, Andre, my strategy is this. I believe that the Conservative Party will save this country, and I'm bullying them into doing it. He said, what's going to happen with your member of Parliament is that I'm going to say to him, look, I won't beat you as UKIP. What I'll do is I'll ensure that you lose. Do you want to lose your career more than you want to, lose the European Union? And my point, Ben, is this. Nigel Farage believes in a two-party system. He genuinely believes, or he believed at the time certainly, that the only way to save this country is to bully the Conservatives into doing whatever. He's a Conservative, but then again, probably so are you. Why not try and say in 2019, let's defend the Conservatives if they've got a sensible leader?
That's fine. It's fine to have feared a Corbyn government and to have feared a second referendum. But then you don't say Brexit's done. you've got to be honest and recognize that the withdrawal agreement did not deliver Brexit and that the trade and cooperation agreement was an utter disaster for the country. Nigel goes on about the need to leave the ECHR. The trade and cooperation agreement commits us to staying in the ECHR. People don't know this. When I talk about the ECHR and I say the TCA that Boris Johnson signed commits us to the ECHR, they say, Ben, you're confusing the EU with the European Convention of Human Rights. They're two separate things. And I say, I know they're two separate things, but the damn treaty we signed with the EU, even though the EU isn't a member of the ECHR, it commits the United Kingdom to remain a member. So Nigel goes on and he says we need to leave the ECHR. He supported a bloody treaty which commits us to the bloody ECHR. He goes on about the need to ditch net zero. That same bloody treaty we signed with the EU commits us to net zero.
But hang on a second. What about incrementalism? Listen, you know I agree with you politically, right? But what about the idea that
Andre, where is Nigel? But Andre, where is Nigel? Why wasn't Farage saying this in 2020, 2021, 2022, that the trade and cooperation agreement is a disaster and we have to unpick it? We have to fight it. We need to take Northern Ireland back. Nigel Farage, this is another thing I haven't mentioned. Nigel Farage is on the bloody record before he took over as leader of Reform, saying that a united Ireland is inevitable. September 2023. Now, if you say a united Ireland is inevitable, it means two things to me. One, you don't understand what it means to be British. You don't understand the democratic unit, the sovereign unit that you claim you fight for. There are over one.
Yeah, but hang on a second, Ben.
There are over 1 million. Can I just put it? There are over 1 million British citizens in Northern Ireland. And when you fly from London to Belfast, you're a second-rate British citizen when you land in Belfast because you're subject to different laws. Nigel Farage doesn't care about that, and I do.
But the reality is, and I'm going to say this as somebody who's family in Northern Irish, you may care about the Northern Irish. Most of us, as English people, did not think about that. What we did when it came to that withdrawal agreement, we rolled our eyes. The Northern Irish are moaning again. If Nigel Farage ignored the Northern Irish, he wasn't the only one.
I'm not saying he ignored them. He didn't just ignore them. He said a united Ireland is inevitable. He also went on to say Mary Lou McDonald, head of Sinn Féin, an organisation that is the political arm for a terrorist group and refuses to condemn terrorism, is a perfectly reasonable human being. He went on to say that he enjoys having a beer with Leo Varadkar. Leo Varadkar was the Prime Minister of the Republic of Ireland and the individual responsible for weaponising the border issue in Ireland. And these are things that are antithetical. You might think the Northern Irish are whinging.
I do agree.
The Northern Irish whinge, the Scots whinge, the English whinge. We all bloody whinge. But we're brethren, we're kin. And if we don't understand, we've got to die on, we've literally got to be prepared to die on a battlefield for each other.
But hang on a second,
we don't understand that,
Ben, what stops me from saying when it comes to withdrawal, when it comes to 2019, when it comes to trusting the Conservatives, hindsight is easy. Obviously I've not called for a united Ireland, but most of the criticisms that you've made of Farage in relation vis-a-vis of the Conservatives and whatever, I was guilty as well. Sure. In a genuine sense, I didn't intend to let the country down, but I would look back at that period and think I made mistakes in the things I campaigned for.
Yeah, absolutely. But Andre, he said this, he didn't say that he was advocating for a united Ireland. He said it was inevitable, to be fair to him. But that was September 2023. September 2023. And one thing he should know, he's deeply embedded in the political organism of the United Kingdom. He should know that the Northern Ireland Protocol is being used as a weapon, not just to take Northern Ireland out of the United Kingdom, it's being used as a weapon by the EU to neuter Great Britain, correct, England, Scotland, and Wales. He knows that. Right. So why isn't he saying the right things? He's not going to lose any votes by saying that he's going to reunite Northern Ireland with Great Britain. There's no one who's going to say, well, I'm not voting for you then. There's not a single British citizen who say, no, we don't want Northern Ireland in the Union. He is fundamentally flawed. He doesn't have a political, philosophical framework which can be trusted. He is a political expedient. He will go this way or that way, depending on where the wind blows. And I wrote, sorry, just last thing. So in the email I wrote to Richard Tice on the 16th of March, 2023, having spoken to Nigel Farage, I said, I'm not joining Reform. I'm not going to join Reform because of Nigel Farage's position on these issues. And I can't trust the party. And Anne Widdecombe pleaded with me, Richard Tice pleaded with me, and in the end, I agreed to join Reform. And with the minute Nigel Farage came back on the 3rd of June, I knew my time with the party was up. I wanted to resign, but people around me said, don't do it in the middle of a general election. We were in the 2024 general election at the time. And when I came out of the general election, I was banging the drum for democratization because I knew the only hope Reform had was to bring checks and balances to bear on Nigel. And he has lied about the democratization of the party. He has not done it. It is in his control. This is a man who doesn't understand the sovereign unit of the United Kingdom. This is a man who doesn't understand the rapid change of our demography is destroying the country, who won't deport all illegal migrants. If you won't even commit to that, our borders will never be secure. We have to commit to deporting all illegal migrants, not ones that come in the future, all people who've come to this country. When they enter this country illegally, they are criminals. All criminals that are foreign need to be deported. It's basic stuff. He doesn't get it.
But I want to stop you on that. The reason is because we all agree politically. Ben, you've taken time out of your holiday to help me on this. What needs to happen next in order to save this country? You know, I'm not against what you're saying. I don't disagree with what you're saying. I don't disagree necessarily with Nigel's position. I just want us to take back control of this country.
So do I.
What should we do?
So the easiest thing to do is for Nigel Farage to democratize the party genuinely. And there are lots of ways to do it without entryism taking place. He's worried about entryism, lots of Corbynista types joining the party and hijacking. There are many ways to avoid doing that. And I've got millions of things I could advise him on how to protect against it. Democratize the party, bring in checks and balances. For God's sake, withdraw. We haven't discussed this, but when they sacked Rupert Lowe, they didn't just sack him. They tried to get him arrested and put in jail. That's what a complaint to the police is. They tried to destroy Rupert Lowe. That is unforgivable. They need to take the knee to Rupert Lowe and bring him back into the fold and withdraw their complaint and apologize to him. That's a big ask. That's a huge ask. And in the process, they should sack Zia Yusuf, who made the complaints against Rupert. If they do all of that, if they bring Rupert Lowe in, sack Zia Yusuf, democratize the party, then I'm back in. In fact, it's not a matter of me. I might even retire from politics because at that point, I know that the country's got a party that's going to see us right. But Nigel has to make those big, big leaps. And I don't think he's capable of doing them.
Do you think, so you say he's not capable. Leadership is difficult. It really is. And there's sometimes, even my tiny little thing in local government and in the House of Commons, there were occasions when, I had to sit in front of people who I agreed with and deliver them bad news. And I won't go into too much detail. Is he tough enough to be Prime Minister?
No, he's not. He's a political expedient. He bends. He won't stand up and back people up. He bends in order to curry favor. We need someone like Trump who does not bend, who has an agenda and is driving the agenda through.
Do you have any candidates?
Well,
I'm not joking. Who would it be?
No, Rupert Lowe springs to mind. He didn't bend. He tried.
I'll tell you one thing about Rupert Lowe. That performance at the House of Commons, I actually phoned his office. I will tell you this. When he put that 10-minute rule bill forward on quantitative easing, and I thought the Speaker disgraced himself by being unfair, but I thought that was an exemplary. He's without question the Jacob Rees-Mogg of reform. He's without question the intellectual heart of it. That the performance in the House of Commons has been absolutely brilliant. Do you know something that upsets me, Ben, more than anything else, is that we're onto a good thing and we're all killing each other.
Yeah, but it's not. Look, I was removed as deputy leader in July. I knew that was going to happen. There was no way Nigel and I were going to work together. I haven't spoken to Nigel since he came back as leader on the 3rd of June, even though I was deputy leader at the time. He hasn't called me. He has. I beseeched him to come to Wellingborough and campaign with me. I offered to go to Clacton to campaign with him, to show unity, to drive it through. He found all sorts of excuses never to come to my constituency. That's fine. And when I was removed as deputy leader, that was fine too. I continued to support reform. I went round branches and I spoke to branches. But then slowly he revealed himself by saying all the things that I've mentioned. And he then, the last straw for me when I knew I had to leave the party was when he put out an instruction to branches saying, you mustn't speak to Ben Habib. The very people with whom I had campaigned, the people that I had led up into the general election. It was Richard Tyson, me, not Nigel Farage, that put the party on the political map. It was us that created the party, the grassroots, the machinery, and everything that brought the party its 5 MPs. And he told the branch members that they shouldn't even speak to me. At that point, I knew I had to get out of the party. And even then, I was relatively silent because I knew the massive persona that Nigel Farage is, and I would be literally whistling in the wind, trying to reveal to people what Nigel Farage is. But then Rupert, who had the same journey as me, tried internally to plead with Nigel, tried to get things done, said the right things, did the right job, was thrown under a bus. Not just thrown under, but they are trying to destroy Rupert Lowe. I
will tell you one thing about me and about this channel, about any infrastructure that I've got. The criminalization of politics is something I oppose under every circumstance. I'm perfectly happy to argue with you. I'm perfectly happy to disagree with you. But the attempt to use criminal charges against political opponents is something I will never support. I want to ask you one final question. Thank you so much for explaining all this and taking time out of your holiday. You've decided now to bring in a PAC. Why don't you explain what a British PAC is and explain what you're doing?
So the Great British Political Action Committee, which was the brainchild of a lady called Claire Bullivant, actually takes a leaf out of similar organizations in the United States, where they're not think tanks and they're not lobbying groups. They're a political action committee with an ideology, with money, putting pressure on political parties to do the right thing. Some political action committees are associated to specific political groupings in the US. Our GB PAC, the GB Political Action Committee, is designed to put pressure on Reform UK and the Conservative Party to do the right thing, to have the right policies, and we're going to create policies for them, find the candidates for them that are capable of delivering those policies. One thing that we're all aware of is the incredibly low caliber of MP that over the last 40, 50 years of membership of the EU has dumbed down our parliament to a point where actually they just become representatives of whatever it is that their leader wants. We need great thinkers, fearless speakers in the Commons, and we want to find the candidates for the political right to do that. And we're also going to draft legislation so that any so-called right-wing government coming into office doesn't have to examine its navel, sorting itself out. We will hand over to them the draft bills that are required to reverse all the pernicious laws put in place by Tony Blair and his successors.
Well, I want to say to everybody watching this the importance of what Ben has just said. You know, I was very proud to work at the House of Commons for the period that I did, but actually now I'm ashamed of myself. The reason is because we didn't work on legislation. I didn't go into my office every single day and look at the laws being voted on that day. What I actually did was worried about the letters that came in about Mrs. Miggins' cat and people who were worried about, you know, immigration issues, social security issues and whatever. And I feel that when I worked in the House of Commons, I had a real opportunity to affect legislation, and I didn't do it because that wasn't the culture. What Ben is doing now is being incredibly supportive of that. Ben, I'm going to say this to you. We've got a tiny little Patriot fund on this channel. We'll support you as much as we can in your British PAC. You know something more than anything else, I want to thank you for taking time out of your holiday. And also I want to say to you that I'm so desperate for us to take back control of this country that I totally feel fine about messaging you at 2 a.m. saying, come on my show immediately. Ben, thank you so much.
No, thank you. And I'm totally fine being messaged at 2 a.m. What I care about is that we get a proper pro-British government at the next election. of capable people armed with the right policies and the right legislation so that we can save our country. We don't need a political expedient who's a great campaigner. We had him. That was Boris Johnson. It didn't work. We now need people who can actually do the job.
Well, Ben, I want to thank you on behalf of my viewers. I know they absolutely love
Thank you.
And until next time, goodbye.